Yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So, with everything happening right now in our country surrounding issues of social justice, Alumni Board felt that it was necessary to host programming this fall, highlighting issues of diversity and inclusion, and how we can help strengthen our community through listening, learning, and then hopefully taking action. So last week, just to give some context, we had small group discussions with alumni to discuss their experiences with PACE as students, and that was specific to diversity and inclusion. And so this week, we're going to be highlighting the action plan for racial equity that PACE has developed, and talk about diversity, equity, inclusion at PACE today. And then I want to go ahead and plug for October 20th at 7 p.m. We have a great panel of alumni to discuss the history of voting rights in the US and South. And so we're very excited about that panel. So with that, I'll guess we'll go around and introduce ourselves. So I guess first, my name's Frank Woodling, class of 2005, and I'm the president of the Alumni Association. And so I guess we'll go to people on my right, which is Ross.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ross Brown, class of 2007, and I'm the president of PACE's Association of Black Alumni. And then I guess that would be Joanne.
Good morning, I'm Joanne Brown. I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at PACE Academy. Glad you're here with us.
Good morning, I'm Troy Baker, Director of Student Life at PACE Academy, and thanks for being here with us this morning.
Yeah, so again, thank you for everyone for joining us, and definitely thank you to our panelists for joining on a Saturday morning. I know that's a big commitment. So we'll jump right into it. So again, we're going to be talking about the action plan for racial equity. We're not going to be going through everything, bullet by bullet today. If you want to read through that actual document, I highly encourage you to do that. It's on PACE's website. I think if you go to the About section, it's in the diversity and inclusion section of the website. So Joanne, question for you. How is the action plan for racial equity developed?
So this summer, well, first let me back up because we were virtual beginning in March as a school community as a result of COVID-19. And it feels like there was just this endless seam of doing school virtually, learning how to do that in a very different way as virtual learning was taking place. And then as soon as what seemed to be the end of the school year was upon us, we started to see racial unrest happening around the country. And we as an administrative leadership team were closely monitoring that. I was already in conversations with some of my student groups, just trying to still stay connected with our students this summer, because we already knew that was going to feel really different because of COVID-19. And we found that racial unrest was escalating and becoming much more of a focus of dialogue and conversations on a national level. Then what we also saw happening at the same time were voices of Black students and Black alumni at independent schools across the country with Instagram pages that were sprouting up everywhere, including one at PACE Academy, Black at PACE Academy. And I really feel like that was giving voice to pain that students and alums had felt while they were here at PACE. And it was necessary for us at that point to really lean into that and not ignore it, and started a listening session tour over the summer where Fred, Asaph, Elizabeth Richards, our board trustee president, and myself went and actually held listening sessions for different stakeholder groups within the community, our Black faculty and staff, our Black parents in all three divisions, our Black students that I was able to still connect with through our affinity groups in the upper school and also in our middle school, as well as our Black alumni with the help and support of Ross Brown. And we took that feedback as well as just our own personal knowledge about what was happening at school. Because I would be lying if I was saying that since I was a parent from 2009 that I wasn't aware of some of these tension points, and also in my role was aware of these tension points. But what the summer allowed us to do was to actually address those because there was such a spotlight on them. And so the action plan started to take shape with the help of our senior administrative team, really pen to paper, virtually, something that we kind of continued to work at day after day for several weeks. And we put that in front of different stakeholder groups as well for feedback before we rolled it out to the entire community. And in fact, Troy and I are still rolling that out. We're going to be hitting English classes next week. We are realizing that it is in this world of hybrid learning, not being able to meet with stakeholder groups in large community gatherings, that it's taking a lot longer for us to get this in front of everybody and really address questions that people may have. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. We're still sort of putting this in front of different community groups at PACE.
Speaking of which, Ross, hoping you can just sort of chat real quick about, your involvement in the Association of Black PACE Alumni's involvement in developing that action plan.
Sure. So as a part of our association, one of the things that I've really been able to do is actually being able to work with Joanne quite closely on things regarding diversity and inclusion at PACE, and kind of seeing how we can kind of insert ourselves, because as an association of Black alumni, we're actually relatively young. We actually started in the spring of 2018. So we're still kind of in the process of trying to find our niche within the PACE community and how we want to be involved. But a handful of us were actually able to take a look at the action plan prior to it going out to the wider PACE community, just to kind of add a little bit of our kind of perspective, some comments that may come from alumni, potential parents, things like that. So that's kind of where we were able to at least kind of insert ourselves into that process and be true stakeholders in the process of adding something to the action plan.
And if I can say, Frank, just to add, because I don't know if folks realize how unique it is for an independent school to have an active Black Alumni Association, a K through 12 school. And so that really served us well, and has continued to serve us well, because we were not in a place this summer where we were trying to find where are our alums of color, where are our Black alumni. I had spoken with some schools that were literally putting those lists together this summer, and we were already able to reach over to our Black Alumni Association through Ross and start to have conversations immediately. And it helped that we were already scaffolding and building relationships prior to this summer. So Ross had some lens and perspective that I think that a lot of schools weren't able to benefit from.
And Ross, am I correct in saying you guys also met with faculty and staff, didn't you?
Yes.
In the pre-planning process?
Yeah, we did. So we had about 4 alumni participate in a Black alumni panel as a part of pre-planning for faculty and staff. And Joanne moderated, which was really great. And we were really able to kind of have a time to kind of reflect on our experiences at PACE, and also kind of make certain things aware to people that may or may not know that these things were going on, especially kind of like the longer existing faculty that had been there for quite a while. But it was really great for us to kind of be able to have some time and space to kind of air those things out, make people aware. And then also we got a lot of really great feedback and questions from faculty and staff about how they can make changes so that the things that we experienced won't happen again. But it was really great to kind of have an exchange and be able to have that conversation. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, so Troy, speaking of the action plan itself, I was hoping that you could sort of help us understand, just from a, maybe start at a super high level of, what are the big ideas of this plan? Because again, we don't want to spend the whole hour going through every detail, but what are the sort of big ideas, the main goals of the action plan? And then once we look at that, maybe I think it would be very helpful for everyone to sort of define what is an anti-racist policy,
Mhm.
and if possible, provide an example of that.
Okay, great. Well, I think one thing we're starting to understand as we speak and interact with more and more groups is how crucial it is to kind of zoom out before we start getting into granular details about kind of daily operations. And so I think that's a great question as we start to try to establish common understanding. And there's a few big ideas that I think you're going to find that run throughout the action plan and run throughout all the work we're doing. When we talk about racial equity, and that's our ability to predict outcomes based on race. So when you get to a situation where you can no longer predict outcomes based on race, we're moving in the direction of racial equity. And so you see that play out in numerous different places on campus, and we see it play out in a lot of different things in terms of students, faculty, and parents. Another big idea for us is anti-racist. And another big idea for us is when we think about systemic racism, and we just talk through our systems that are in place in the school. And the reason we're using these big terms is because they're organizational and they're not necessarily interpersonal. There are some folks who are reading this plan and they're hearing conversations and they're thinking too small. They're thinking about interpersonal interactions. They're imagining the teachers and the administrators running around the school trying to find all the racists and calling them names and suspending them, right? That's an interpersonal interaction, and it's very small. What we're thinking about is a little bit more on the organizational and system level, and with the understanding that you can have great people working in a faulty racist system that continue to produce results that disproportionately affect people of color. So you can, and I say that with the full knowledge that this is now my 6th year at Pace. And so I have been working and operating in some systems that are racist. I would not call myself racist against Black people or any people of color. And so I think people have got to let down that defense a little bit, like push pause on that defense mechanism that says we're all good people. Well, you can have great people working within a system that produces inequities across the board. An example of a system for us, our honor council system, other systems where we elect students for leadership positions, some of our volunteer situations at the school. When you look at places of power around campus and you don't see everyone in those rooms, you're not really a community yet, right? One of my gauges of a true community is when I go to the important places, is everyone there? And a very important place for our students is Honor Council. And this is, I think it's a wonderful system in terms of discipline, in terms of restorative discipline, in terms of building students up and giving kids responsibility to hold one another accountable and to advise one another. I've been a member of that Honor Council. This is now my 4th year as a member of the Honor Council. And the work that happens in that room it's amazing. But if you go in that room year after year, you'll notice that all the kids tend to look the same. They're typically kids who have been at Pace for a long time. They're typically white, and they're typically from Buckhead. They're kids who really understand the culture of an independent school. They are kids who see themselves as keepers of that culture. There are kids who understand how these processes work, and there are kids who know how to leverage their experiences to get what they want when it's time for college. And so you look at that room and you've got to ask a few questions. The first question that I have is it that Black kids don't have a sense of justice? Is it that Black kids do not want to be a part of a process geared towards like discipline and accountability? My second question is, are there people in the school trying to keep Black kids off of this honor council? My answer to that is no. I don't think Mike Gannon, our head of upper school, is doing that. I don't think our deans are in their offices trying to come up with a nefarious plot to keep all of the Black kids off of the honor council. If the answer to those questions is no, then we have a systems issue. Like It's not rocket science. We want to demystify some of this. This is not like a mystical process. There's a systems issue at play. And so we look at our inputs, and we have one way to get on this honor council traditionally, and that is you self-nominate. So a kid would go to their dean and say, I want to be on the honor council. They write a paragraph, they do a few things, and then their name is on the ballot for election, and that's that. We all know when you feel like a guest somewhere, which a lot of our alums and students of color have said at times, if you feel like a guest, why would you raise your hand to be the keeper of the culture, right? Someone's got to kind of nudge you or invite you into that. That's what we mean by equity. Equal means, hey, everybody's got a fair shot to nominate themselves. That's true. But when you're looking at a place where you have kids who are questioning their level of belonging anyway, it takes a lot to raise your hand and volunteer to be a keeper of that culture. And then there's another layer of, will people even vote for me? Am I even right for this? And then there's, quite frankly, a trust factor. Anytime you're a person of color in a majority white environment, anything that has to do with justice or discipline, you've got some questions in your mind about it. And that's just the way it is. So we added additional inputs. I probably need to shorten this up a bit, but we added some additional inputs. We made adjustments to our system. And through a student election, we had the most diverse group of kids we've ever had on the ballot. And we've got the most diverse honor council that we've had. And that was not a result of going around handpicking people or saying, here are 3 really cool Black kids, we're going to put them on the honor council. We want to set things up so that if I get hit by a bus this weekend, that system keeps going. So you're not relying on one person to go around and identify the best people. They're systems that will replenish themselves and continue to regenerate year after year. And so we want to apply that to various systems around campus. And when you look at a school like Pace, a K through 12 school that's as sophisticated as we are, we have systems everywhere. And some of them are invisible. We don't even know they're happening. We don't even see them, but they're everywhere. So just take that framework that I just talked through and apply that to various different areas around campus. And from a systems approach, I think that's how we start to approach racial equity, through the policies and systems that we create and retool.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely helps me personally to understand. Yeah, I mean, like your distinction between interpersonal and systems. I think that's just such an important distinction. Because for me personally, yeah, I hear anti-racist, and in my mind immediately does it trigger that defense mechanism of like, oh, well, this is just, we're trying to weed out the people who we're defining as racist. But I appreciate you clarifying that that's not really what that means. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah,
So,
I think I'm sorry. I think
go
another
ahead.
piece that has really helped our community understand this idea of aiming and moving towards racial equity and being anti-racist is understanding that to be anti-racist actually means that you are part of working to reframe, dismantle, identify those systems that may be impacting people in our community in a very different way than the majorative voices, and wanting to see that be more equitable. And so you're not saying that to be anti-racist means I'm racist and now I'm going to be anti-racist. It's actually being on the front lines of helping us work towards, to Troy's point earlier, making sure that we are a racially equitable community, that the outcomes and the sense of belonging doesn't lie with your race or your identity, that really the systems now are in place to make that an equitable experience for everybody.
So I guess my next question would be, because this is an alumni association, panel, how can we as alumni help to, support students, keep PACE accountable to the action plan? And maybe Ross, maybe this is a question for you. How can we help, the alumni, the Association of Black PACE alumni, keep PACE accountable?
Yeah, so one of the great things that's kind of come out of everything is that it's really inspired a lot of PACE's Black alumni to dial back into our community, which has been really, really great. To be quite frank, when everything was happening, I was actually approached by a group of think 4 members of the class of 2000 that really saw something that kind of triggered past memories and a part of a community that they saw themselves in, were a part of, and still are, and really want to insert themselves and provide a level of influence. And that really was kind of like the kickstart to our involvement this summer. And yeah, I think, being a part of the Association of Black Alumni is kind of primarily for our Black alumni, but I think finding your niche within the community to be a part of things is really great. So for the Black Alumni Association, we've had a couple of events over the past, actually prior to all of this, because our main goal is just to support students and provide support to them in any way that we can. So we've done a couple of breakfasts with the Black Student Affinity group. We actually did a tailgate for the Pace Love It game last year. We also have a recognition ceremony for our Black graduates that we do every May now. So they're just like different ways that we're trying to kind of figure out like our schedule and things like that, but we're trying to provide kind of multiple opportunities for Black alumni in particular to kind of dial back into the community. And I think as an alumni association as a whole, I think that a lot of these events, like the one that we're having today, like the small group discussions that we're having, like the discussion on voter rights, that's a great way to kind of reintroduce alumni across the Alumni Association back into the PACE community. And hopefully those conversations, those panels can kind of at least start a spark in people to kind of try and find their way to dial back into the community. Because even before I was the president of the Alumni Association, I started my re-engagement to the PACE community as a community coach and coaching middle school boys soccer. And I've been doing that for the past 6 years. So, that was my way in, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. So my hope is that we're doing our part as a Association of Black Alumni and Alumni Association as a whole to kind of provide more opportunities for people to get re-engaged in the community.
Yeah, I think that's important to highlight is, yeah, alumni really can just engage in whatever they feel passionate about, and just that engagement itself, that creates that diversity of backgrounds and thought and feelings. And so like just having a diverse group of alumni just even involved in any way with the school seems to be a great way to help on these issues of social justice as well.
Of course. And yeah, and one of the great things is that visibility does wonders. I know when I was doing alumni pace, leadership pace 2 years ago, there was this sense among the current Black students at PACE that they didn't really know what the Black alumni, who they were, what they looked like, what their deal was. So for just to have that visibility, because I think there were 3 Black alumni in my leadership PACE class, just us being there and walking around campus kind of provides a sense of hope and awareness that there are other people that have gone through this experience that is very similar to you. And so we have kind of tried to use that as our way to kind of build more bridges, build more connections. But yeah, I think for those that are in Atlanta, showing up and being present is huge, regardless of your background. And that presence makes all the difference in students' lives. And that's our big goal.
Awesome. Question maybe for Joanne. And this is actually a question that was submitted by one of our participants today. Our current efforts, and I assume this is regarding the Plan for Racial Equity, are current efforts aimed at students and parents, or is this really just focused on students?
So the Racial Equity Action Plan actually calls for all 3 of those stakeholder groups, including trustees and alums, to be committed to the action plan. We have spent the first 6-7 weeks of school kind of putting this plan in front of our students. We realized pretty quickly that they didn't know what was going on this summer, and really had to kind of start to think through what that looks like at age appropriate levels to put the plan in front of our students, to get their buy-in and to answer their questions. And so that's going to be sort of a consistent thing. With our faculty, that professional development piece was important in just framing and getting them ready to be able to be part of rolling this plan out and being committed to that in the conversations and curriculum development that we committed to doing in the action plan. We also know that what we do from the hours of 8 to 3, unless they are discussed, affirmed, at least if we're not partnering with parents, then we're missing a huge piece of this. And that was what was exciting about having Troy's position sort of created as director of student life, was being able to redefine what that really means, and that really includes every part of a student's experience, including bringing the parents into that conversation. And so we've been able to be in front of our parents club and Community of Change, which is another parent-led group at Pace that has been so instrumental in having these kinds of conversations with our parents. They're going to be hugely instrumental in getting the information that we're putting in front of our students in front of our parents. We were able to do 2 virtual learning events with our parents already, with Allie Michaels this summer and with Allison Brown, Dr. Allison Brown, a psychologist. Both conversations were around diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically race, how to speak to white children about race, and also another session around racial trauma. What does that look like? What do we need to do as a community to support our Black students or your Black children, if you're a parent, around racial trauma? And so we're just, again, very intentional in making sure that what we roll out with our faculty and with our students, we're at least mirroring those conversations in parent groups.
Thank you. Yeah, so another question that came through from our participants was, what shifts are being made to introduce high-level, rigorous, culturally relevant texts into reading and English courses?
Well, again, when we talk about reading and English courses, I would like to start by zooming out a bit and thinking about the role of representation in curriculum in general. And we want to think about that K-12. So we can do a one-off. Again, we can do a one-off that says, hey, we're going to pick some really great novels for American Lit, and we're going to move away from some of the problematic texts that we've all kind of leaned on that have become the literary canon, which no one can explain exactly why they're in the literary canon, but the literary canon all seems to be the same messaging with the same guys, the same 5 or 6 guys writing their American experience. And we've kind of rolled with that for a long time. But if you want to zoom out and think about, like, how do we look at curriculum in general? How do we look at our essential questions as teachers? What do we do in the lower school when you're going into a unit on Canada, or you're doing your unit on France, or you're doing your unit on Australia? Like, novels in English class, that's terrific. But if we're talking about global citizens, everything we do, are we able to explore that in a way where we're asking the right questions about the people that are there, where they come from, and what they contribute? And to me, that's kind of an overhaul of not only materials, but also just kind of retooling in terms of some of the questions that we have and how we explore things. And I remind everyone constantly, all of these things that we're talking about tie directly back to our mission. They all tie directly back to what we said we were going to do as a school. That's what your mission is, your promise that you make to your families and your community. And so we've already said we were going to do all of this. We're just kind of almost like backfilling to make sure that, like, as we redefine what it means to be a global citizen, like, all of a sudden we've got this understanding that, oh, like, being a global citizen also means I understand the kids that live 10 miles from me, not just the ones that live across the ocean. Like, I understand the kid next to me in math class, right, who doesn't live in my zip code. Like, that's a part of being a global citizen. And so as we move through curriculum, we are working to identify some third-party consultants to go through our curriculum K-12. with an eye towards representation and equity. This will be a long process. I think this will be one of the longer processes. I think this is rebuilding the engine, right? You take your car in, I can change my tire myself. So there are some things we've done. We've changed some tires. There are some things that don't take a long time to do. There are some things that are somewhat complicated, but your curriculum is your engine. And when you're talking about rebuilding your engine, that's major. That's major work. And so that's something that's going to take some time to do, but I want to make sure we don't lose sight of how big this is. I don't want to get caught in the weeds of who's picking the book for 10th grade English and think more about like, how do we go about the process of teaching and learning K-12 with an eye towards equity and representation. And I don't know if that's really answered the question the way that it needed to be answered, but I want to make sure that as we talk, we talk about the entire experience and what kids are seeing from beginning to end. And some of those, again, are small adjustments. It's little stuff like, I think Joanne and I talked about this, when they do a unit in France in first grade, typically everything I've seen of France, every unit I've ever done as a student, and most of what I've ever seen, it's like the Eiffel Tower, it's crepes, it's the museums, it's famous artists that have come from there. And all of those things are terrific. But there's over 3 million Algerians in France. And what are these people from Northwest Africa doing in France? And why have they been there since before the Great Depression in the United States? And how did they get there? Because typically Blackness is introduced as people in bondage. That's how I was introduced to Blackness as a student. It was in history class, and it was about slavery. And then we went to English class and we read Huck Finn. Like, that's what we did. What's their contribution? Have all these African people made any contribution to French cuisine or music or art or anything? I would say the answer is yes. But typically you can move all the way through and never explore this. You can never explore it. Why are there so many Southeast Asians in Canada? I feel like we feel like kids should be asking those questions. Why are all those people from Southeast Asia in Canada? I don't know the answer to it, but I'm saying, like, I feel like kids should get in the habit that by the time they've moved through our lower school, into our middle school, into our high school, that's just a natural way of thinking, right? And that goes back to the term anti-racist. It's about going into every space and saying, who's here? How did they get here? What's their contribution? What's their value? What's their worth? How do we interact with them? How do they interact with me? What's their perspective? And I think it's a framework again. And so as we talk about curriculum, I would just caution those watching the call that let's not get too small. Let's not be small. Let's think big. Let's think the entire engine. Let's just not think about, a spark plug, one of the 8 spark plugs. Let's think about, like, how do we overhaul this entire thing?
And I think people get really defensive when they hear things like overhaul, because they feel like now you're removing everything that I held so near and dear to my heart around the things that I learned at Pace. And that's not what we mean by that. It actually means we're now broadening a scope. The lens now becomes much bigger, much wider, to include other narratives, to scaffold other narratives. So to Troy's example about the introduction of Black people, or Blackness has always been bondage, how about we just expand that a little bit and we start to include in that narrative pre-colonialism, ancient African civilizations, so that we now give context and perspective. So when you start to speak about enslavement and the enslavement of Black people, you understand where those people came from. You understand the richness of that narrative, to then become a little bit like, and I've seen it, Troy and I have taken students to Ghana for the last 2 years as part of the ICGL program, and we've watched our own students stand in Accra and hearing history that they weren't taught at school, and they go through this phase of, what? How am I a senior and I've never heard this before, and I'm about to go to college and I don't feel equipped to have this conversation? They go from anger and embarrassment to leaning in and going, okay, I need to know more. Like, I need to figure this out. And we shouldn't have to, it shouldn't be that we have to take kids to Africa for that awareness to take place, right? So it, just because we are including other representation, other narratives, other stories, other authors, doesn't mean that we are discarding other real lived experiences. We're adding to that so that there's greater context and understanding.
So what Joanne means is everybody's still going to get to eat crepes. Like,
That,
it's all going to work out. Yeah, everything's going to
that.
be fine. Yeah.
But we're going to have a little side of Joe
Yeah,
Levi
that's
just
right.
along
Yeah.
with it too. So just be brave.
Everything's going to work out. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. Actually, the France example really hits home for me because I did a study abroad in college in Lyon, France, and yeah, and I didn't realize that. I mean, France is still very majority white European descent, but I mean, I was shocked at how diverse it was, at least in the areas that I was living, and I had no clue. And so that's a great point. It's like, these are the things you don't realize what you don't know until you don't know it until you realize, you have to live that experience. Joanne, I had a question for you that you brought up affinity groups earlier, and I was hoping you could talk just briefly a little bit more about that, because that is definitely not something that we had when I was there. If you could speak to that.
Sure. It wasn't something that my sons had either when they were at Pace. I have two sons who graduated from Pace. We actually started to roll out affinity groups 2 years ago in the upper school. And affinity groups are spaces, a gathering of people who have a shared identity. They are able to speak into those groups from the I perspective. And when we talk about affinity spaces, we call those, you'll hear folks say, that's a safe space. That's a space where I don't have to explain why I am having this lived experience, because everyone in that space shares my identity, and I don't have to justify why I'm sharing what I'm sharing or explain what that means. Everyone in that space, because they share that identity, they have an understanding about that. And so when we're talking about affinity spaces around racial identity, it's helpful for those groups to be able to come together where they are not reflected as the majority, to help with identity development, identity affirmation, which actually equips our, in this case, our students to be able to engage with the rest of the PACE community with a lot of confidence. I don't think we would have had the amount of young folks of color on the ballot for honor council if we had not been affirming their identity in those affinity spaces where we could say, you belong here, you are amazing. And even if the outside world is telling you something different, here you really, really matter. We really want you to feel like you have some ownership in what is happening in this community. And so there's oftentimes a need for that space. We even have that for our adults. We have it's very different than alliance groups. We also have alliance groups, which are student-led clubs, which are gathering of people who either share an identity or people who stand in solidarity with that group. So our Black Student Alliance is open to everyone in the upper school who stands in solidarity with our Black students who want to be a part of learning about the Black experience, who want to be a part of the programming that our students roll out around their club. The Black Student Affinity Group is just for Black students in the upper school. We also have a Black Student Affinity Group in the middle school. And again, that is for identity affirmation. It is for identity development. And honestly, a space for them to just exhale a little bit. They don't get a lot of mirror time, which is where if they're in classrooms where there may be one or two, they're not seeing themselves reflected or represented throughout the day. And that's just a space for them to be able to see themselves in in a space where they're typically not going to be able to get together and see each other regularly on a daily basis. It is not a bad thing. It is actually a healthy space that's really needed. And we tell our students when we roll this out, understand them, because when you get to college, you're actually going to hear about affinity groups. And even in corporate America, parent resource groups and affinity groups actually exist to be able to support those identities. So we have the Jewish student affinity group, we have the Black student affinity group, Asian student affinity group, Hispanic student affinity group, and LGBTQ+. So we actually have more than just one affinity space. And we are probably a little bit later in rolling out affinity groups than some of our neighboring schools who have had them for about 10 years. So for us, even though many this summer may have heard affinity for the first time, this is not a new idea. It's not a new concept. We already had them at Pace. And Pace, we were actually slower in rolling those out than some of our schools down the street.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Ross.
Well, I guess just a little bit of like historical context. So Pace did have those things when I was there. The Multicultural Club was something that was actually pretty big when I was there. And for whatever reason, I think part of it was like the faculty sponsor left and things like that. But we did have those spaces. They were fairly big, but I think it's great what you guys are doing to kind of have both the associations and the affinity groups to kind of round out that picture a little bit more.
Yeah, and it sounds like, and Joanne, what I was hearing is that it's sort of tying back to what Troy said. I mean, this really does go back to the overall mission of the school. I mean, you mentioned that, I mean, this is preparing students to when they get to college, when they get into corporate America, that they're already comfortable talking about these issues. And so that's just going to make them a stronger, employee in the future and provide them with more success. So it's cool hearing that all of this really comes back to, of creating global citizens. And so that's really cool. We only have 15 minutes left, so I want to encourage any of the participants to submit questions if they have them. We only have one comment so far that, more of an idea than a question. Love Pace's Sunday supper every year on MLK weekend, and wondering if the Alumni Board and Black Alumni Association can organize, additional suppers. And so that's something that we can consider for sure. So again, just want to encourage anybody on the call to submit a question if you have one. I had one more question for I guess it would be for Joanne and Troy. I mean, how are students feeling right now? I mean, in regards to this topic, I mean, COVID, I mean, just everything. How are students feeling right now?
Troy, do you want to?
I think they're well, number one, they're way more resilient than any of us, and still much more pliable than any of us. And so everything that kind of gets thrown their way, I feel like we're a lot more exhausted and we feel a lot more heavy lifting than I think they do. But with all of that being said, I think they are like a little off balance. I think they're a little tired. I think they're spent. There's so much coming at them. There's so many adjustments coming at them daily. And they keep jumping through the hoops of getting, their temperatures taken and the policies on when they can drink water or not, or, when can your mask be on, when can it not be on, and box lunches, not being able to gather as a community, not being able to go to each other's games. Like there's so much about school that they love from a social aspect and a community aspect. And they're kind of getting a watered down version of that, a reduced version of that. And I think it affects the energy on the overall campus. But I think it's still in their rearview mirror, the way they felt in March, April, and May. How isolated they felt going to school on Zoom every day. And so for them, they understand, like they still have that awareness. Sometimes kids forget things in a week, like they forget how things work. They haven't forgotten that. They're still like, at least we're in school. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the vibe. It's like we're here and
Yeah.
we cannot mess this up. And everybody needs to have their mask on and do not, I mean,
Yeah.
they're like yelling at each other, like, do not mess this up. So in that way, they're all pretty happy because they can still remember what it was like to be sitting in their rooms 7 days a week, just sitting on Zoom, for 6 hours a day. So in that way, they feel good.
And I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
go ahead, Frank. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I think it is healthy for us to recognize how hard all of this is, and how stressed we all are in our jobs, in our social lives, and just in working through these social issues. So I think it's important to recognize that. So thank you, Troy, for talking about it from the students' perspective as well. And I just wanted to say, yeah, I mean, this is all about us working together to support a community that we all care about deeply and that has given so much to us. And so we're trying to give back. And so, yeah, I think the overall goal here is just, how do we learn to love each other better? And that's sort of what I take away. But I just wanted to say that.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Frank, you just kind of build on your point. I've had some really good one-on-one conversations over the last couple of weeks with either current parents or alums, parents of alums. And some of the questions that have come up are more from the white perspective, and questions around like, are people going to get crowded out here? Like almost like, hey, if we've got $10 and now you're telling me you're going to spend $7 on the Black people, what's going to happen now? Like, how does this go? And the point that I wanted that where we ended up landing was a couple very simple statements that I think would be helpful for everyone to hear and communicate as you go forward. And so when we talk about equity, when we talk about racial equity and representation, it's for the benefit of the whole community in so many ways, right? There's this moral charge there, but then there's also some really concrete things, right? And so I would prefer that when a fraternity gets ready to dress up in blackface, or it's Halloween and the sorority says, we're going to dress up like Black people, I would prefer for the Pace kid, the Pace white kid, to say, I'm not doing that. And I would also prefer for them to say, I'm not doing that, and you should not do that either. Because there are things that I understand about the world, and there are things that I understand about people that have developed my moral compass and my outlook in such a way that I cannot participate in this. And the work we're doing now is a big part of that. It's a big, big part of that, is that as a community together, like, we have a lot of work to do to understand one another as we go out into the world, because that will be the same kid that 20 years later, when somebody's putting their picture on Twitter and they're saying, I didn't know. Like, we don't want any Pace kids to be saying, I didn't know, 10, 20, 30 years from now. Like, that's a failure on our part, in my opinion. Now that we know better, it's a failure on our part if we've got kids graduating who are saying, I didn't know. Because that means we didn't prepare them for the world they're going into. Like, everybody on this call, the world these kids are going into now is going to be so much more complex than the world we walked into. The tools they're going to have to navigate it, it's a different set of tools than what we had. And so as we try to equip them for that, I understand there's always going to be some generational lag time, right? So there are going to be some folks who maybe graduated in the 80s. They're saying, well, hey, what's going on here? The world you entered in 1988, all right, is nothing like what these kids are going to walk into in 2027, 2028, 2030. And so the things that we talk about now and we get them ready for, there's a big goal for everyone who's present on that campus to really understand what they're going into and how to navigate that. And it's going to pay dividends, and mistakes are going to be more costly than they were 10 years ago. Those mistakes are going to cost them more 10 years from now than they did 10 years ago. And so, yeah, we're doubling down on some things. Like, we're spending a lot of time on some things to get them ready for the world they're going into. And I just wanted to just make sure that's that's clear, that we're educating our entire community. Like we're working really hard to educate everyone on that campus for the world they're heading into.
And it starts at a really young age, and they want to do it. They are, the kids know that even though some things may feel really uncomfortable, well, as alums, you all remember the relationships that you had with your teachers. They know that their teachers love them. They know that what we're doing and the work that we're doing is really to try to build stronger community. It's actually not a divisive mechanism. This racial equity action plan and the work that we're doing and that we've committed to doing is not intended to divide, and that plan should not be used to divide, and actually is intentionally created to bring community together. Our sixth graders, I want to read, I printed a class contract that one of our classes did, and these are like 11-year-olds, okay? So if they can figure out how to have civil discourse and how to engage in difficult conversations, we most certainly can as adults. But this was what they agreed to. In this class, we agreed to be engaged, to pay attention, be a part of the classroom community, keep asking questions, be honest, value progress over perfection, to respect others' thoughts, ideas, and experiences, to speak from the I perspective. I want to say that I think they listen to Ms. Brown. That's why they put that one in there. To be empathetic, commit to a judgment-free zone, to not hold a grudge, to be brave, to treat others the way they want to be treated. We realize that it's okay to make mistakes and feel uncomfortable, but we agree to be humble, ask for forgiveness, extend grace, and be better. And then they have a little place on there where they can sign their name on the bottom. That is their class contract as a sixth grade group. That's all.
I think we should all, yeah, we should all sign that document ourselves.
Right?
So we're quickly running out of time, which I hate because this is awesome. But a question from our participants. Curious how many alums are on the call. Currently it's 13 right now, but we're recording and we're going to be posting this discussion to the Alumni Association website on the PACE server. And so people can watch it. So hopefully people will, and we'll let people know that it is on there. How can those of us outside of Georgia get engaged? So you're on the call today. This is it. And I think we should probably have additional small group discussions because they were so well received last week. And so, we'll need to discuss that with the alumni board and figure out timing of all that. I mean, our alumni community is very busy. And so we're trying to be respectful, of everyone's schedule and try to, not overburden people with a bunch of Zoom calls. But it's important that we do this great programming. So we'll talk, maybe more about additional small group discussions in the future. And then again, on October 20th at 7 p.m., we're going to have that panel of alumni to discuss history of voting rights. So you can please engage there. And then we're going to be rolling out some additional things in the spring. These will be Zoom. Everything's going to be on Zoom for the foreseeable future because of COVID. And there's going to be additional programming in the spring. It'll be different. It'll be different topics. And so I guess in terms of outside of Georgia, silver lining of COVID is that everything is virtual. And so I think that'll be a positive for those outside of Georgia to be engaged. So we only have a few minutes left. Let's see. I don't see any more questions from our panel here. So unless anybody has any final thoughts.
I just want to thank our alums. We have some of the best alums. I don't go back to my high school. Well, first of all, it doesn't exist anymore. But if it did, I grew up in Maryland and we're just not as engaged. And so I kind of have this level of envy. I love the PACE community as a parent of alums and now as someone who works here. And so we could not do what we do without your help and support. So really, thank you. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Frank, for just sort of leading the way.
Yeah, I would just echo that sentiment. Just appreciate our alumni base, and we'll just encourage everyone that if you have a question, ask. I don't think there's a bad question. We love feedback. We love questions. If you need clarity on something, just ask us. We're here as resources for that reason.
And then I guess on top of that, to fellow alumni, I would just say, like I said earlier, just find your niche. Find the part about the PACE community that you love and that you want to be a part of and that you want to dial back into. I think that's really the easiest way to get involved. It doesn't require a lot of effort because it's something that you're passionate about, something that you're interested in. And then also, there's some other opportunities that we're coming up with specifically for Black alumni. Troy and I have been working on building the foundation of a mentoring program for our Black students as well. So we're developing some new avenues for our Black alumni to get involved in other ways. But for the Alumni Association as a whole, I would say, yeah, find your niche and go for it. And then also just like tell your other friends from PACE that you're still in contact with about the things that you're doing. I think that level of involvement and understanding that other people are doing it can be infectious. And so if you can be the spark for someone else to get involved, that would be great as well.
That's great. Well, thank you to everyone for participating today. And we have the courage to strive for excellence, even on time, and we are finishing right on time. So thank you, everyone, and go Knights.
Good night. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Ross.